This session is how PropTech can redefine the value chain or establish a new one. I'm going to start off with Melissa. Sorry, ladies first, Melissa. So you get the first question. Do end users and customers understand PropTech? Or is it just a buzzword for people like us in the business? And what are some of the examples? And Jaime has already shown us some examples, but we just want to hear from you, Melissa, in terms of when we say PropTech, do our end users and customers actually understand that? Do they need to understand it? Is it important, or is it only important for people like us in the business?
I think some of them have an awareness of technology. Whether they know that it's called PropTech, I think is irrelevant. QIC manages a huge range of shopping centres here in Australia, or shopping malls, as some of you might call them. For us, it's not necessarily the technology that the end users or the shoppers can see or touch or even interact with. It's the experience that helps us create for them. So, you know, a lot of retailers themselves talk about omni-channel strategies, and they are leading the way in terms of what they're delivering to their consumers. But for us, our version of omni-channel is a little bit different, being the landlord and the building owners. So I think the short answer to the question is possibly consumers or end users know what PropTech is, but I think it's our job more to apply it to our assets and our spaces and remove sort of the barriers or friction from the way that people interact with them, and the way that we create communities and places for people to come together.
Thank you. Alain, would you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question around, you know, do we perceive PropTech? And I like to think about what we are living as the iPod moment, and no consumer understood MP3 players, none of them. But when they said 1,000 songs in your pocket, it changed the industry. And I think when we say built environment that works for the public and for the users, not just for capital, then they will understand it. And remember that the one that said 1,000 songs in your pocket inherited that industry.
That's true, very good. Idriss, what about you? What do you feel? Is it important for end users and customers to know what is PropTech, to understand what is PropTech, or is it just good enough for them to experience PropTech and they don't really need to know more than that?
Yeah, I would like to echo what Melissa has said, actually, because, you know, for instance, we send emails every day, and I don't personally understand the technology behind the emails, you know. So I think what matters really is the use case, and specifically on the user experience side. I think one of the main innovation driver is the idea of user centricity in real estate, right? And so how can we shift from a product-based approach to a customer-based approach, or to an asset-based industry to a service-based industry? And so it means that we really must have a great user experience. I have a friend, the founder of Zigu, who is speaking about the pizzafication, I guess. It's the invented word of real estate, meaning that, you know, when you order a pizza online for $5, €5, whatever, you can track where it, or even a t-shirt on Amazon or Alibaba, you can track where it goes. But when you do any investment in real estate, it doesn't matter the real estate asset class, right? It can be office, retail, whatever. You have a very bad user experience. And so I would like just to remind maybe what a great user experience means. According to us, it's really based on 4 pillars, and PropTech could really play a role leveraging these 4 pillars. So these 4 pillars are instantaneity, connectivity, transparency, and hyper-personalization. And so it's really not adjectives that resonates with real estate. It's not really synonyms of real estate. But if we want to make real estate work for the end user, as Alain was just saying, I think we need to focus on these 4 pillars, and PropTech is the only way.
Thank you, Idriss. I'll ask Jaime to comment on this.
I would like to say that I think we have seen in our PropTech incubator what has been saying, and I would catch on the creativity and also what Melissa was saying on basically the experience. So the two things is what really fosters innovation. The first by experience and the ideas together, which then transforms into like companies. So I think this is key to understand. PropTech, as I was showing before with the barometer, is happening in the last decade. It's exploding, and there's lots of things going on and that will come. So we should bet for those two probably.
Which perfectly leads me to a question for you, which is what has motivated the explosion of PropTech on a global scale? Is it that the existing value chain is broken, or is it just that everybody wants tech, and it's a nice word to use? Why is this sudden explosion of PropTech? I mean, real estate has been here for ages, for hundreds of years. What has led to this explosion?
Right. I wouldn't say it's broken, the value chain. I would say there has been historically lots of inefficiencies in the market. As we know, all the information problems that we are now better dealing with big data analysis and all those tools that we have. But if we look at the global scale, what I would say, I would answer with a global perspective. I think what has happened in the last, I would say 13 years, is a massive injection of liquidity from central banks. We know that the Federal Reserve since 2008 injected more than $14 trillion. So that, just to put this amount of money in perspective, think of the European sovereign debt crisis in 2012 when you had Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy going almost at the edge of bankruptcy, and the European Central Bank injected 1 trillion euros. It's kind of the same as $1 trillion. So the figure I was giving before, $14 trillion only by the United States, is enormous. We have the balance sheet increased from $4.5 to $9 trillion of the Federal Reserve, together with the Biden stimulus fiscal plan of $5 trillion, that makes 14. So it's a huge stimulus that came right after the pandemic. And then European Central Bank is doing kind of the same thing. So that's one thing, I would say, huge liquidity that goes to equity. And the second thing I would stress here, it's the pandemic helped us to transform our economies. It's much more digital. We are all now used to use all those apps and softwares, and we understand it. So this combination, I think it's a cocktail why we have seen this explosion.
Right. I think when I was at a conference recently, we talked about why has suddenly everybody gone to a digital platform? For example, Zoom existed well before the pandemic, right? Very few people use Zoom. I remember when I used to call some of my colleagues, let's do a Zoom call, and they said, what is Zoom? But suddenly after the pandemic, Zoom became, the go-to platform, much bigger than all the other platforms that existed, and even Teams and so on and so forth. So definitely the pandemic has helped this. But don't you think the customers have also found that, and maybe Alain can answer that, don't you think the customers also found this is an easier way for us to do business? We don't actually physically have to go anywhere and do anything. And as a designer, don't you fear, what are your comments on that?
Yes, I think it is true that the pandemic has accelerated something. I think we've all experienced that. But I think we have to go back to fundamentals. This is triggered by an exponential technology. An exponential technology means that things don't seem to be moving, and then suddenly they accelerate away from you. Nokia died by being late by 1 quarter on smartphone. 1 quarter. No boards ever lost the company on a single quarter delay. So I think COVID may lull us in a sense that things changed because of COVID. No, things were changing because we're sitting on top of an exponential technology that is achieving something quite special. And what is happening is that the cost of information is going to zero. So digital transformation is something everybody throws about now, but 10 years ago, it meant something. It meant that the marginal cost of information goes to zero, and then you can create exceptional value out of information that you couldn't do that before. So I saw that in mobile phones in the 90s, where I was designing DSP chips. I saw it in mobilities in the 2000s, when we started selling mobilities. I saw it with WeWork, when we started selling membership, right? This is a real estate company whose input cost was concrete and output revenue was membership. By divorcing those two things, they're creating a mobility-like company that sells miles or tons transported instead of cars, trucks. And so by doing that, you create a completely new business model. Now, don't think COVID did that. Silicon did that.
Very insightful. Thank you. Melissa, would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I would tend to agree that for us and in my personal experience, it was very helpful having COVID because there were certain technologies that we had maybe been piloting or trialing that were considered experimental or interesting pre-COVID. But COVID really just gave us a platform to accelerate their implementation and embedding it into our business. So a big example that we had in the Australian market was we would often negotiate with our tenants to give them a concession or a discount on their rent if they were going through financial difficulties, and we'd maybe do less than 100 per year. So we didn't actually have a digital process to do that. The way the Australian government put regulation in place meant we were going to have to negotiate nearly 10,000 negotiations in just a few months. So it pushed forward the rationale to implement something that previously was done on paper or via email into a full integrated automated system. And I could not have pushed it that quickly without that sort of external force. So the technology existed, but the business appetite wasn't there until there was that external force. So it's been very helpful in some senses, hindering in other ways.
And of course, the investment from governments and private equity investors have obviously helped this whole PropTech boom in a way. And as a designer, Alain, you're a designer. So what is the role of a designer and design firm in general in this value chain and in the future?
The designer view of the world is to serve the end user. That's what the designer and the architects, we work with architects very closely, it's about designing the outcome. And we're very excited about this transformation because we're putting the user and the product back in the middle. Right now, in the current value chain, let's understand how it works, right? You guys want to put some money to work, or you've got a business that needs space, and you commit to a development, and you talk with your designer, how do I achieve my outcomes? Everybody is motivated to go and pour concrete. For example, for me, the most successful intervention we did as designer was not to build an extension at London City Airport because we could achieve the retail numbers we needed by just reconfiguring the building inside. And we measured that. So that was really great from a sustainability point of view and a capital efficiency point of view. Of course, the contractors next door didn't like it. What? We're not going to make another terminal. I thought we were going to do that. But just to the point, we then get stuck into this contracting moment. Yeah, developers get, let's build this, and then the contractor tries to build it for as cheap as possible because that's what you ask. You ask them, you pick them on the cheapest way. And then you get a cheap product. I mean, imagine walking into a car showroom and asking for the cheapest car that complies to contract. I'm not even sure you get a Kia or a Tata Indica V2 or a Lada. You'd get something even less than that, right? Have you seen any car company, any product company making money selling crap? I haven't. So as designers, we're really excited that we can get back into a new value chain like WeWork, where we're actually delivering outcomes. Now, one of our customers is Apple. That's as much I can say. But let me just share some observation. Do go into an Apple store and observe. Observe and ask yourself, what was it designed to do? It's a modification, behavior modification platform, the Apple Store. It tries to get you to have a higher propensity to buy the brand, to leave there re-energized, I'm going to buy more Apple. I really love the Apple Store. Have a look at the ceiling. See any of the sensors? They're not visible. See any glare? Not at all. That would distract you from experiencing that iPod. Does it get cool? Does it get hot? I mean, I'm on George Street or I'm in Union Square, and the temperature is perfectly controlled, 90 degree, high level of oxygenation, low level of humidity, not a breeze at your high level that would make you move. My God, these are the most expensive store to design and build. They also happen to be the highest grossing store in the world on revenue per square foot. Now, if you are after a great built environment and you can make it fit into your value chain, then you're going to decimate your enemies. Absolutely laminate them. And that's why, as designers, we're really excited that we're going to get our industry back. We're going to find people to work with to create great built environments instead of really bad products. But I mean, when I say really bad, 40% of the space is not used. 20% of it doesn't work. The acoustic in the room is terrible, the heating over there. Most BMS systems are never configured. Our industry is so inefficient. Now, tell that to a PropTech guy. It says, this industry is the largest in the world, and it's also the most efficient in the world. Do you think people are going to find ways to make money? You bet.
That's great. It sounds like the casinos in Las Vegas. If anybody's been to Las Vegas, I was there just a few months ago. When you enter the casino, they design it so beautifully, you don't want to leave. They have the right amount of oxygen, the right amount of light, the right amount of food and drink to make sure you don't leave. And I love Apple shops. I was one of the first Apple buyers many, many years ago standing in that queue, and I know how they make you feel. Do this data that we collect have a great value in this whole PropTech revolution? Because people are designing based on data, not just anecdotes. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. The same as Alain was saying at the very end, I very much like what you said at the end. You enter a market when you want to disrupt it. It's a huge opportunity. As I was saying also before, the PropTech, the real estate market is has been very rigid, very local, lots of regulations, very difficult to find information because basically you make decisions based on information, but if information is very obscure, then lots of potential to gain and to disrupt the market. And the answer is absolutely yes. Everything started in 1995 with the PC and some softwares to analyze big data that disrupted the mortgage lending market. In the United States, we have seen the disruption of shadow banks, which were those online lenders that became subprime lenders in the United States, and they were originating mortgages to distribute to other places in the world. And they could only do that because of new data that decreased the adverse selection component once they had to distinguish between borrowers. So basically, that's one thing. And then it's affecting different parts of the real estate market.
Absolutely. Idriss, I have a question for you. And this is to do with Dubai. Now, all of us are from Dubai or from the UAE or at least from the Middle East here. And we know what's happening in Dubai right now. The property market is super duper hot, right? Almost every day I get an email, all sold out. So a lot of things are happening here in Dubai, Idriss. But obviously things are going to change. do you think PropTech is going to be this differentiator? I think right now people are buying because everybody's buying. But at some stage, the market is going to slow down again. It's going to soften. Do you think PropTech is that differentiator that can differentiate between different offerings where people are going to really look at what these companies are offering in terms of PropTech? Not that they need to know what is PropTech, but will PropTech be that differentiator?
Look, that's a question I was recently confronted with because PropTech Lab, one of the company I have, recently acquired Luxembourg PropTech, so the peer company active in the Luxembourg country. And there, it's a market very similar to Dubai, actually. Developers just starts to dig a hole and start a construction site. They don't even market the project. And they already have investors calling them, can I buy? So the market is indeed also super hot. And of course, in these contexts, developers are not forced to innovate, and so it's easy to stay in the mentality, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Why should we do things differently if it still works? So they're not incentivized by the end user or by the investors to innovate. So it could be a sort of barrier for innovation. But nonetheless, I think definitely PropTech will be helping the ones that are the most visionary to differentiate themselves from their competition, to their competitors, to create products that are more aligned to the new needs of end users. And at the end of the day, to maybe buy more shares on the market. And I think the ones that are not innovating will be gradually disconnected from the market because they will not serve the needs of their end users anymore. And I think for Dubai, maybe an opportunity is actually not only to think at the project level or at the company level, but maybe to think at the level of neighborhoods or cities. Because for instance, when the metropole in France were created, they said to the developers, if you want to win this call for tender, you need to innovate. So innovation is a selection criteria to get the permit and to win the call for tender. And so this really incentivized the developer to work with startups, to create new products, new services, to test and learn and develop new stuff. And so this is one of the reasons why I think a lot of French developers are more mature, more agile. The innovation maturity is higher than the French developers, just as an example. Another example is maybe, for instance, Ricardo Veludo, who is the city council, the real estate council of the city of Lisboa in Portugal. He conducted a large project of actually data, so it's also coming back to the point of Jaime. So they studied how are people living in cities, how do they spend their time? They commute during 1 hour, 2 hours, how much time do they work? What do they do when they are home? And so collecting a lot of data to understand how can we make the real estate work for people? How can we develop new service? Maybe it's mobility services, food services, energy services, security services, any kind of services to make sure that, at the end of the day, the city is built based on their needs. And so it was a very interesting note. And so I would say the opportunity for Dubai is maybe that the regulators decide to incentivize the private sector to create a resilient city and to tackle a number of issues that are at the city level, not only at the building level, like energy, waste management, mobility, aging of population, everything related to foods, to health, etc. And so I would really strongly encourage to focus on not only, building level, but at the city level. So yeah, that would be my take, maybe on a higher level than just, on the specific project.
So Melissa, new players are entering the PropTech market every day, and the likes of Tesla, Amazon, Google are looking towards taking design and construction in-house to ensure their assets are fit for purpose. How can the value chain respond or adapt to this? Does PropTech play a role? A very quick answer, so we have a few minutes left for questions.
the quickest answer is yes. I think for a long time, the occupiers have been pushing the agenda, and that's become even stronger. So in a bid for relevancy, I think the organizations that are in the space of designing and constructing spaces that they want to be attractive to those occupiers, they need to, I think, you know, to reference the phrase innovation, they need to factor that in, and it needs to be part of the proposition. Otherwise, you know, the value chain will evolve, and it will evolve around the people who don't keep up, and they'll become irrelevant.
Sources of these funds, sources of these investments, are they mostly coming from VCs? Are they coming from family office, private equity? Where do you see that?
As I said, we have a universe of 1,800 investors all over the world. We have mainly investment funds, but it's a good question. We could actually, it's a very interesting question. We could try to disentangle their size and type to understand where they are attracted to. That's something we haven't done, but we can, because it's a very large number of investors to get an answer to that question. Unfortunately, I cannot answer this, but it's a good one.
I can add a few insights, if I may. So on the investors profile, at the level of Europe, because I'm also the co-founder of the European PropTech Association, and so we track a number of we track 3,200 startups in Europe, and so we have seen that the amount of capital that were raised really grew almost at 100% year on year. So it was $1.6 billion euro in 2018, I think. It was 3 billion in 2019. Then 1.2 billion in 2020 due to the pandemic, and then again in 2021 it was record-breaking. So really like almost growing at 100% year on year. And we splitted the category of the investors, and we saw that it was mainly VC, but generalist VCs. I think it was around 40% of this capital was invested by generalist VCs. If you combine all the capital invested from 2018 to 2021, and you have two interesting trends. You have a more important number of vertical VCs appearing, so PropTech VCs in Europe. So you had only 3 vertical PropTech VCs in 2015, and today you have 32 in Europe, and all of these have also often raised a second round, a second fund or third fund. So the amount of dry powder available is really huge. And the second interesting trend is the corporates investing more and more in direct in startups. And so we have seen more and more corporates taking investments as part of their agility strategy to be able to deploy services on their real estate project. And so these would be the two main takeaways that we have seen.
Yeah, I was just going to add, in fact, one of the points that Idriss just made around multi-level investment, which is unique to PropTech compared to, you know, biotech or fintech. And that relates specifically to our value chain because we're so intensive on asset, it's so capital intensive. So you see the traditional VCs coming in and with a hypothesis that they need exposure to this new sector. So you have probably oversupply of cash at the moment. Your valuation have gone really, really high. But interestingly, so you've got all the traditional property investor creating funds just to be aware, just to keep, so you can either be an LP into a fund or create your own fund. First one probably was Cognicity, Canary Wharf Group in London, setting up accelerator 10 years ago now. And so that it's just about exposure, it's not financial return. But I see multi-level investment arising. And the reason for that is because if you unlock something through technology, you might not be able to value capture it at that technology level. You may need capital. Let me give you an example. If you were a company that created robotic construction and distributed supply chain that allowed you to create multifamily housing on exiguous sites inside city context. So what I've just said with many words is I can now make money on all those sites that the traditional house builder can't make, right? As a tech company, I won't make the money. The person that makes the money is the person that owns the land. So I'll create a PE that will buy those land. I will create the tech startup that unlocks that land, and then together we create the value. I can choose where I make my money. We're seeing this with logistics. We're seeing this with reintermediation of data through property. We're seeing it everywhere. Multi-level investing. So it looks like a little PropTech fund like nothing, and then above it, you've got a 50, 100 billion fund unlocking property plays. And as I said, electrification of logistics, servitization of real estate, servitization of commercial real estate. All those plays are now in play from large, very large funds, and then with a sub fund. It might be a family office, it might be a small seed fund.